Good morning, everyone, and welcome to a special episode of Creemee Cast live from Bean Studios. Yes, Bean Studios in Northfield. I'm sitting here today with Gregory Wrightstone. He's somebody who travels around the country explaining some of the science behind some of the misconceptions of the science behind climate change and the narrative of climate change. He's also a best-selling author. Two books behind him there, Inconvenient Facts, and I can't quite see the subtitle there, and a very convenient warming, but I would love for you to let everyone know.
Yeah, my first book was Inconvenient Facts that was published in late 2017. It's still very much relevant today. In fact, it was back as it was both a number one and number two bestseller. The audit on Amazon on the category of climatology. So the Audible was number one, and this hard copy was number two. So that's after 7 years, it doesn't happen very often. But I was driven to write this book. As a geologist, I knew that some of what we were being told was just incorrect. And again, my science background is geology, particularly ocean acidification. Hasn't happened in the past. It's not going to happen in the future. And so I suspect that other things we were being told were also incorrect. So I did a deep dive myself because it was really my personal journey and my quest for the truth. And what I found, frankly, scared me and angered me because you and everyone watching this and listening to it, they're being lied to on a daily basis about climate change on so many levels. And so it's my mission and the mission of the CO2 Coalition to provide the science, the facts, and the data that tells us undisputedly there is no climate crisis. And in fact, this latest book, A Very Convenient Warming, we dive into what's actually happening is our Earth's ecosystems are thriving and prospering, and humanity is benefiting from the combination of warming and more CO2. And again, so we at the CO2 Coalition try and stay out of the politics as best we can. It's hard to do with this subject matter, but we do that and stick to the science. We have nearly 200 of some of the top experts in the world, astronauts, Nobel laureate in physics. Dr. Will Haber's our chair. He's a distinguished emeritus professor of physics at Princeton. And so we're scientists, again, telling the truth about what's actually going on. So many people, almost everybody I talk with, their eyes get wide when they see some of this information we provide that's been hidden from them. Uh, I'm convinced we just need to get our narrative out there. And it's a science-based narrative, by the way. And once these people learn that actually we don't have too much CO2, we don't have enough. Actually in a period of CO2 starvation, carbon dioxide starvation, and plants in particular, of course, benefit greatly from increased CO2. We're seeing a greening of the earth. By that, I mean more vegetation increase from the near polar regions to the equator. Every ecological niche is showing huge benefits from the combination of warming and more CO2.
So I want to correct myself as well, and I want to make clear to everybody who is listening to this conversation, you are part of the CO2, not initiative, but the CO2
Coalition.
coalition.
I'm the
Okay.
executive director, and our website, we've got a lot of rave reviews about it. You can learn the facts there. It's co2coalition.org, and then we have a companion website for if anyone's homeschooling. We have wonderful uh, information. We've got lesson plans created by Dr. Sharon Camp, and that's co2learningcenter.com, co2learningcenter.com. So we have books that are done manga style, actually. They're entertaining and they're just wonderful. We have a full-time artist in Brazil, Tiago Hellinger, who does the artwork for those in videos. And then we have companion lesson plans that are available free of charge as a PDF download. So it's our mission is to provide this material to schools that need it and homeschooling parents to try and we see so many children that are scared. And the new series we just launched uh, I call it the Sleep Well series. The first the first book is Chloe the Clownfish Sleeps Well, and it tells about how a clownfish on the Great Barrier Reef was frightened to death and couldn't sleep, and it provides the information what's really happening on the Great Barrier Reef. So I collaborated with Dr. Peter Ridd, who's one of the top Great Barrier Reef experts, so we're working together in tandem to get the science right of what's going on the Great Barrier Reef and reefs really worldwide. And the fact of the matter is, it's interesting. You're being told that the Great Barrier Reef is dying, and it's because of terrible heat. Move 150 or 800 miles further to the north is the what's called the Coral Triangle, and that's some 3 to 5 degrees centigrade warmer than the Great Barrier Reef. And reefs there thrive and prosper, and even much, much warmer water. So it's not global warming. There are various things that affect reefs greatly, and climate change and global warming is not one of them.
Well, I think that's probably the most important takeaway from what I've seen so far of your work is there absolutely is a counter narrative to the one we have all been sold. And I really I want to touch on that the children's book that you just showed and just really the whole concept sleep well as a whole. I remember being in late middle school, kind of that age when you start to understand a little bit about how the world works, or at least what you're taught anyway. And I remember being up at night, laying in bed, thinking, what does all this matter if climate change is just going to kill us all? And I remember thinking like, oh, the ice caps are melting, so like it's going to flood here in Vermont, and it's going to be. I can remember that vividly, and then going through high school, the University of Vermont, and just being in these classes where it's they're just pushing this a lot of it is the UN goals. And I remember being in a class specifically with the UN goals, when that was like the core tenets of what the class was teaching us. And I remember one of them being was like population growth outpacing our food production. And I saw a stat that you had talked about that actually isn't true. And I guess just to segue into that kind of conversation, is like it's not just it's so interesting is the CO2 conversation, how that affects everything else, and
Yep.
how it really does embed this idea of like scarcity and fear into you when you're at a young age, and how that affects other aspects of your life. There's so many ways I could talk about that, but I'd love to hear a little bit more about that statistic specifically, like the food production thing.
Well, let's look into that. So we look in my new book, A Very Convenient Warming. I have a chart where I look at the top 8 crops worldwide, and we just see it goes back about I think 40 or 50 years, and just year after year after year after year, these crops are breaking production records. We see that everything we look at, corn production in the United States in the Corn Belt, breaking records year after year. And there are really 3 things driving this increase. Technology is one of them, of course, but that 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 happens in step changes. But what we're seeing is an annual increase. And uh, for record harvest, there are 3 things driving that. That's efficient use of nitrogen fertilizer, which is made from fossil fuels. I'll remind you. You may not know that.
Oh, I did not know
Uh,
that.
yeah, nitrogen fertilizer. The process was developed in the early 20th century, and it wasn't until World War II ended that the ingredients that are in the fertilizer had been going into bomb making and military uses. And after World War II, now all this became available, and that's a huge increase of the food production. Temperature increase means that the coldest nighttime temperatures are being elevated. Instead of it being 28 degrees, maybe it's 32 degrees. And what's that mean? That means we have lengthening growing seasons. In my book, I captured 2. I show a chart of growing seasons in the continental United States. growing seasons have lengthened by more than 2 weeks. That's a good thing. That's a really, really good thing. If you have an apple orchard in Michigan or Vermont, wherever you are,
Sure.
what do you fear the most? A
Oh,
late spring killing frost.
right.
It'll ruin your year. Well, now because of warming, there are fewer of those happening. And and then finally it's CO2, it's called the CO2 fertilization effect, whereby increasing CO2 is driving plant growth. If you think back to middle school, you're young enough that you can remember a lot of this. I've got quite a few years on you. But in middle school, you probably had a little cup, styrofoam cup maybe with soil in it. You'd put a bean in there and you watch it grow, and you learned about photosynthesis.
Sure.
And and so what do we need for photosynthesis? Water, sunlight, and carbon dioxide. And the more carbon dioxide, the better. Some people say, "Oh, my plants grow so much better because I talk to them." Well, that might be true, but it's not because you're talking to them, but you're exhaling uh, probably 40,000 parts per million is what you're breathing out. Ambient CO2 levels are at a little over 400. So if you're talking to your plant, you're breathing on it, and that plant's going, "Oh man, it's doing a little plant dance." So yeah, yeah, breathe on me some more because they plants thrive. We're actually CO2 impoverished, as I had mentioned before. So more CO2 is driving crop growth. And also in my new book, I have a great chart. I got the information from the UN Food and Agriculture Organization, along with I combined with other uh, scientific and organizations. But we look and we find that crop growth and production is outpacing population growth by a lot. And there's another line on there, acres that's planted. People have said, well, yeah, but we're planting, we're growing a lot more crops, but it's because we have more acreage under that's being tilled. And that's just not true. And we capture that. This is globally. We see it's nearly flat is the acreage farm. And so production's up, it's good. And there are a lot of things too that go into this because increasing CO2 not only is a plant food, but it also helps the plants survive drought better. It's got tremendous ability to counteract dry periods because they don't need as much water. They're not losing as much water, if you will, through the transpiration process, breathing in and out, if you will. And as they expel oxygen, there's also water vapor with it. And they don't have to do that as much. So there's a great drought resistance that's built in with more CO2. And here at the CO2 Coalition, one of our unofficial motto is we love CO2 and so should you. And that's our pull-up banner when we go and plant the flag at these teachers' conferences. In fact, last spring we had a double booth exhibit at the National Science Teaching Association and had just published uh, a pretty detailed report slamming the NSTA. And we took a look at their climate change policies, what they're recommending, and it was just full of misinformation, disinformation, just they leaned on a consensus. They like consensus science.
Yes.
And so the NSTA and the scientific education establishment are really pushing. They're not trying. They are indoctrinating our children into this climate cult, and they lean on consensus science. There's a consent. There's a consensus of science. Well, there's not a consensus of scientists that believe in catastrophic warming that's driven by us. And it's just false. We look at, for example, Michael Crichton, the famous author. His quote was, "Science is not consensus, and consensus is not science." Another great, the Richard Feynman, great physicist, uh, probably the best quote I've heard on consensus. He said, "I would rather have questions that can't be answered than answers that can't be questioned." And that's what we have today in the climate. Isn't that a great quote?
That's a beautiful quote. Yes. Yeah.
I'd, I'd rather questions that can't be answered than answers that can't be questioned. And that's what we have today in this any debate. And yes, yes, Virginia, there is a debate on this. And
Is that where
But they
is that?
they don't debate us. They need to
No.
silence me and my colleagues because we tell a compelling, fact-based story and narrative of what's actually happening. It's completely contrary to what you're being told every day.
No, and I see at the base at the bottom of your bio on the website for the CO2 Coalition, you have a quote there, and I'm going to totally butcher this in Latin. Auditor e altera per. Let both sides be fairly heard. How did I do?
It's yeah, that was yeah, that's a basic principle of English law is let both sides be fairly heard. And so that's basic Western law that's been built in for
Yeah, and it
since
will. I think it's been lost. At least it has been for. I mean, I don't know. I wasn't alive, but probably the last 50 years. It seems to me that academia, as a whole, has really gone down this path of like, we want concrete answers, and those answers cannot be questioned, and we're not allowed to. And it's become very, and that's why, and I think this is a good time to kind of open up this conversation. It's like when I watched the hearings, Senate confirmation hearings of RFK Jr., and you have Bernie Sanders up there who is just, berating him, I believe climate change is an existential threat to humanity. Do you, yes or no? And he wants like a yes or no answer right there and then. Uh, and it's such a complex issue. How could you give a yes or no answer without trying to explain your take? I'm sorry.
RFK is kind of problematic. You can like some of what he does. I like in terms of he was right about the COVID vaccine and some of this the health things, but he believes in the precautionary principle that well it there's what if this happened? We need to stop that, and he hates people like me. He calls us science deniers, and in the past, he's called for my imprisonment.
Wow.
He's actually suggested some in the past that climate deniers is what I'm called, should be imprisoned because we're a danger to society. And he's kept quite quiet on that.
Yeah. Well, it's
Yeah,
it's interesting, and I you mentioned before the conversation started that you are potentially going to be providing some of the science for the Trump administration on some of this stuff. And I just, it's funny, you do see Trump on, for example, the Joe Rogan podcast saying, I got to keep RFK away from the liquid gold. I got to keep him away from yeah,
we need to keep away from climate change debate too,
yeah.
because their whole. I mean, you go to the EPA website, NOAA, NASA, uh, Interior, even Department of Energy, Department of Defense. You go to their websites, and man, it's all, at least it was as of 2 weeks ago, just polluted with lies about climate change. And so they relate climate change, catastrophic man-made climate change, global warming, and just everything that it's an all of government approach to the fight climate change. Well, it's you might as well you might as well lobby for the sun to rise in the west and set in the east. You're not going to. We're such a small amount uh, in terms of affecting what the global temperatures are.
So that was another thing I mentioned before, and I'm trying to be cognizant of time here, but we did talk about geoengineering, and I mentioned to you there's some groups out there. Yes, you said that think it might be a good idea to geoengineer the climate as a result, as a means to stopping climate change or as a way to mitigate some of the effects of CO2 emissions. And I'm just curious to know if you've heard of any of that stuff and what your thoughts are on it.
Yeah, there have been small attempts made. What bothers me are these people claiming that it's already happening. There's a worldwide conspiracy with jets uh, providing chemtrails, they call them. They're not chemtrails, they're contrails. It's water vapor. And it just is. And there's same people, and it's crazy. Some of these people are on HARP, which is HAARP, high altitude, atmospheric, whatever it is. And, people claiming that they have these solar weapons that they burnt down the Lahaina in Hawaii was from that, and that they're steering the Hurricane Helene. They used HARP in our technology to increase the rainfall and steer it into Republican areas. And no, it's just nonsense. Um, go find a better conspiracy theory to follow, like the Loch Ness monster or Sasquatch. But no, it just, I've already wasted too much of my time talking about a non-existent event like geoengineering.
Okay, so there's a few other things I wanted to ask you about. One of the things I heard in your lecture that I saw, you were talking about RGGI's Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative, and
Yes.
from my understanding, this is a law that they're trying to implement in Pennsylvania in the legislature, or is it just something that's already been done?
Well, it's before the state Supreme Court in Pennsylvania. Most of the states in the Northeast, and I think Vermont is a part of the RGGI, Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative. And what that does is uh, it increases your electricity costs by uh, actually forcing CO2 emitting energy consumers out of the state and out of the Northeast. Well, they're just move over to Ohio or someplace that doesn't have these climate taxes on them. And so you're just exporting your CO2 emissions to a neighboring state, and they're benefiting economically.
So,
The main goal of RGGI, as it is with the Biden administration and those promoting a net zero green energy, their goal is to increase your energy costs coming from gasoline will be increased, diesel increased, natural gas costs are increased, and that's their goal. They want to drive you into by increasing those costs. The high cost electricity from wind and solar looks a lot better. Plus, they're being subsidized. And let's just look at New England, for example.
sure.
Uh, there's a huge field, largest natural gas field in the world is just south of you in Pennsylvania in northern West Virginia, the Marcellus and Utica shales. By far, the top 10 gas fields in the world combined don't don't equal what the gas they have there. But you in New England cannot get access to that because although we ship LNG, liquefied natural gas, around the world, you are not allowed to bring it into the port of Boston. And why? Because of the Jones Act. The Jones Act says that no merchandise or any goods can sail from one American port to another unless it's an American flagged tanker and an American crude tanker. There are no American flagged LNG carriers. So, we've got this problem with LNG. Instead of buying cheap, plentiful gas from Pennsylvania and Texas and Louisiana, they can't get the Pennsylvania gas up to you because they won't. New York and New Jersey have banned any pipelines to be built. Uh, and so what you're doing, you're bringing in natural gas into New England that's maybe 4 and 5 times what you could buy for out of a port of Louisiana or Texas.
Yeah, no, I've seen the differences in prices. Just even gas prices being in the southwest or southeastern United States as opposed to being in Vermont. It's like $1 more even, like which is kind of crazy. But we have this thing here in Vermont, which sounds very similar to what you're describing with this regional greenhouse gas initiative thing that they're doing. We have the Global Warming Solutions Act here, which essentially ties us to these climate goals. And the climate goals are trying to meet emission standards under a certain level. I believe pre-1990 levels. That's what they want to try to get us under, and we have to meet these goals in increments over the next 10 years. And there's a provision in our legislature or in our law that allows any third party to sue the state of Vermont if we do not meet these climate goals. And I'm just
Yeah,
curious to know, like, you must see this stuff all over the country, this kind of stuff.
I've been saying for some time now, we are winning. And by
Yeah.
that, I mean we have a strong wind at our back, and it's almost a gale force wind now since the election of Donald Trump. He hasn't wasted any time pushing back on this climate nonsense. But I will have to go. I have a hard break here in
No,
about one,
I,
and
I thank you so much.
let's do it again sometime.
Sure. Yeah. And I think I would love to. And please stay in touch. I would love to, I'm going to follow what you stay up to, what you're doing. And good luck with everything. Thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you, Paul.